Welcome to Rays of Hope, Masikhanye. My name is Sivu Kotela. The word of the Lord says that you are the light of the world, and it is the purpose of this show to enable you, your family, and your society, your community, to make this world a better place by sharing biblical principles. And right now we are continuing with our theme of hope for the African family, and today we are looking into divorce. And to help me look into that topic, I am joined by one of our resident pastors, Pastor Mandla Lupondwana. Pastor Lupondwana, welcome to Rays of Hope once again.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Whew, what a topic. Divorce.
Yes.
We don't always like to talk about it, do we?
Especially in church, it seems as if we're promoting it when we do. We're afraid of appearing like we are promoting it.
Exactly. So sometimes the safest thing then is to pretend as if it is not there.
And which is not really helpful because it is there and it ends up not empowering the people, especially in our community who are going through divorce or are divorced.
Exactly. But perhaps before we go ahead and speak about the different things that we want to talk about, maybe we need to define it. How does the Bible what does the Bible define divorce to be? What is the biblical definition of divorce?
At the very basic element, divorce is the ending of a marriage. But when you come to the Bible, you find two streams of divorce. You have people who divorce that divorce will be followed by a remarriage. Okay. And for instances like those, texts like your Matthew 5:32 and in Book of Mark, where Jesus talks about there needs to be adultery or fornication in this marriage for you to marry the next one. Otherwise, the second marriage becomes adultery. Now, that's for people who are thinking of getting married again. Then the first marriage kind of has to end and there's to be adultery there. Sure. That's the first stream. The second stream, you find it in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where Paul says, don't divorce your spouse, but if you do, you remain single or be reconciled. But he doesn't give reasons there. Okay. So for people who are not going to remarry, the second stream is people divorce and there are no specified reasons. Sure. So that's what you see. It's the ending of the marriage, but the ending of the marriage could either end to result in remarriage or end in resulting in someone being single. So that's what you find in the Bible.
Okay, so two definitions and
two streams of the same divorce.
Yes. And normally, what differentiates them is what you do after you've divorced. That's what you're saying.
Two things. First is why you got divorced.
Sure.
Why you got divorced determines which stream you end up falling into.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then, of course, later on, what you do.
What you do, yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's an eye-opener for me. You're going to get back to it. Now, obviously, maybe I should ask this. Before we speak about the relationship between legal divorce and biblical divorce, maybe we need to speak about what's the relationship between the role of the law of the land in marriage as it relates to the Bible.
The first person to recognize marriage was God.
Sure.
You see that in the Garden of Eden, the husband and his wife, that's Adam and Eve. The state comes later.
Okay.
The state comes later, but when I say later, I mean even after the Tower of Babel, after the flood of Noah, then you start saying states. Sure. The state comes in later. And for thousands of years, the state wasn't really involved in marriage. It wasn't. People got married and it was a family thing and so on and so forth. But later on, the state got involved in recognizing the marriages to a very large degree in order to facilitate divorce.
Okay.
To a large, when you read the Marriage Act, you find that to a very large degree, it's trying to see when this thing dissolves, what happens, who gets what, and how do we manage that. So the state's involvement in recognizing marriages and being involved in that business was to be able to manage divorces. Sure. Now, that's the state coming in, but it did not take away God's role as the person who designed marriage, who created marriage, as the person who recognizes marriage. Sure. Which therefore means that for us, when we get married first and foremost in the eyes of God.
Okay.
And then because the state has gotten into the business of marriage, we also get married in terms of the eyes of the state. Sure. And that's the relationship. Okay. Now, what would happen sometimes is that someone can get divorced and depending on what the marriage can end. in terms of the state can give you a divorce decree and it has ended. But as to which stream you fall into is determined to an extent by why you got divorced. And then you fall into one of those streams, which has led to people saying, well, you may be divorced in terms of the law, but not biblically. Why? Because Jesus talks about how if you divorce your wife and it is not for marital unfaithfulness and you marry somebody else, and she marries somebody else, you cause her to commit adultery. Now, how can you commit adultery against somebody who's not your spouse? Well, it's simply because at the level of the recognition by God, it appears that you may still be married to this person. This is why, even though you may be divorced, the marriage is over, you're not living together, but you still can't remarry because that remarriage would be considered adultery.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Oops. Look, it as we said at the beginning, that the most natural and comfortable place, especially for the church, to be is not to talk about divorce and pretend as if it is not happening.
True.
Are there times, biblically speaking, that it is best to divorce?
Yes. Let me start by the first case of divorce we see in the Bible. Hagar. Hagar is a maid servant, Sarah's maid servant. And Sarah and Abraham have difficulty, according to the discussions in the couple, within the couple, having a child. So Sarah suggests that Hagar comes on board and becomes a surrogate of sorts, or a second wife, so that Abraham could have a child. And so the Bible says then Abraham takes Hagar to be his wife. So at the point when Hagar is pregnant, she's a wife, who's also Sarah's maidservant. But to Abraham, she's a wife. There are complications there. We'll discuss that some other day. She runs away, meets an angel, comes back, and Ishmael is born. Ishmael grows up. Isaac is born. And then Sarah comes to Abraham and says, send the slave woman away. And Abraham consults with the Lord. The Lord says, fine, listen to your wife. Now, this is the first case of divorce we see, where the Lord says, no, go ahead, and then gives comfort to Abraham. I'll take care of her and the boy. The boy will grow up to be a great nation. So the first time we see divorce in the Bible, God gives the go-ahead.
Sure.
He is the one who gives the thumbs up. Now, of course, we don't always want to talk about it, because it appears as though we are saying to people they should go ahead and get married. That's number one. Secondly, marriage has the capacity to transform you and make you a very cruel person. The godliness that we try through the Holy Spirit to work towards can be completely destroyed by being in an environment where this marriage is bringing out a beast in you that may not even exist, but creates it in this environment, such that you may end up being lost for eternity because you stayed and allowed yourself to become that monster. Had you left and gone the 1 Corinthians 7 route, you would have lost your marriage but probably gained eternity. Now, I say this because as a church, our primary concern is salvation.
Sure.
Such that we are open to having you in the kingdom single than to lose you for eternity married. That's where we are as a church. Do we value marriage? Of course we value marriage. We promote it. We give it our best shot. But do we value it more than we value your own salvation? No. We value your salvation more.
I love that. Absolutely love that. But look, and I think you what you've just said leads me to perhaps the most important part of this conversation, and it is the people that are affected by divorce. Of course, there's that uncomfortable word, divorcee.
Yes.
What is God's attitude towards divorces? And then later on, we are going to talk about children of divorces. And of course, I don't need to supplement that question. Sometimes, and mostly as a society, the way we look at people, and as a church in particular, we seem not to have good opinions of the people that have gone through divorce. And sometimes we even invest God with those attitudes and let the people think that that is also how God sees them.
In the book of Malachi, chapter 2, there is a popular text. God hates divorce. I say popular because a lot of people are contemplating divorce.
Sure.
That's the text that plays in their minds. God hates divorce. And that's not the full text.
Sure.
And the full text goes on to talk about how the divorce, now you could be understood in two ways. How the divorce is covering violence with your garment, or it's covering your garment with violence. Now, it suggests that when you read the whole passage, the Lord is taking an issue in that passage with people who seem to be dealing treacherously with the wives of their youth. When you look at the context, and it talks about people dealing treacherously with the wives of their youth, it appears as though they are no longer young, both of them. But then he has an opportunity to say, I can divorce this wife and probably get another wife and leave this one and abandon this one to whatever circumstances she may find herself. And that's the treacherous dealing with the wife of youth. And that's the part that God hates. Now, as much as God hates divorce and is very clear about that, he loves people who are divorced. Our marital status does not change God's love towards us. It doesn't change our value in God's eyes. Because if it did, John 3:16 would be, for God so loved the world except divorced people that he gave his only begotten son. And that's not the case. And so he loves the people who are divorced. Even for the people whose divorces are for reasons that my wife burnt toast, I'm divorcing her. You may have a very weak reason for divorcing, but God's love for you does not change. It's not affected by that. Now, having mentioned the issue of weak reasons, it's important that when we think about people who are divorced, we remember this. Most people don't marry to divorce. I say most because there are people who marry with the intention to divorce and get pension money and settlements, blah, blah, blah. That's a separate line. That's a separate business, what I'm not talking about. But generally, when people get married...
Business in the true sense of the word.
Yeah, it's a business, really. They're raising funds. But people generally, when they get married, they intend to be happy in their marriages. They're getting married for keeps. And so by the time they get to a point where they decide to divorce, it's not something they wanted. At that point, they may feel that right now, this may be the best thing to do. It's always an unfortunate thing when somebody's dream of being happily married for the rest of their lives does not work out. And even though from a distance you may look at the reason, feel that reason was weak, but the person at that time felt that it was powerful. So I don't think that when we say, even if it was a weak reason, when I say even if it was a reason of burning toast, we should think in our minds there's a category of weak reasons. It for you was not there, it might be weak. So for the person who's divorced, years later they may look back and say, that was a weak reason. But we leave that to them and the Lord. So the Lord loves people who are divorced. When it comes to children of the people who are divorced, they are as valuable as though their parents had never divorced. So that their value and the love that God has for them is not affected by the marital status of their parents. Now, I say this because sometimes it appears as though when people go through a divorce, we make them feel like they have failed. We make them feel like there's something wrong with them, like they've disappointed God. And the reality is this: if all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and that makes us a disappointment to God, then everybody would be a disappointment. Everybody would be a disappointment. But the fact that the Lord, in spite of the fact that we have fallen short of his glory, still chooses to pursue us, still chooses to activate a plan of salvation so that we can make it to the kingdom, means there is no category of sin where we say, I'm a category A sinner, but when you category Z, there's no such. There are no platinum sinners and bronze sinners. We have all fallen short of the glory of God, and nobody should think that their marital status determines how God feels about them, determines how God values them, and determines the contribution they can make in this life and in God's church.
Pastor Lupondwana, I want to end this conversation by giving you an opportunity. There is someone that is watching us right now, and they've gone through divorce, and you've aptly articulated how painful that experience is. But they look at how they are treated by those around them, and sadly, even by members in the church. And they are starting to doubt God's love for their lives and God's plans for their life. And of course, there is a child who's gone through the trauma of having to choose between their parents. I want you to directly speak to those individuals right now.
I'd like to say to the person who has gone through divorce, God loves you with a love that is everlasting. With a love that is not moved and affected by your marital status. Sometimes, as the church, both as members of the church and as leaders in the church, even as pastors, we do not always reflect that love of God to one another. And it's possible that you may have experienced us at a time when we don't reflect God's love simply because of an attitude we may have towards your marital status. And I want to say this. Even when we fail to reflect God's love, do not doubt that He loves you, whether or not we reflect it.
Sure.
And I want to say to the child that has gone through it, number one, you are not your parents' decisions. You are not your parents' divorce. The love that God loves you with and the value that you have in His eyes is not affected in any way, shape, or form by their marital status. You are valuable in God's eyes. The psalmist says you are created a little lower than the angels. I do not want you to doubt it. Is it painful? Yes. Will God carry you through it? Yes, He will. Can He give you a bright future in spite of that? Yes, He can. But do not doubt His love and care for you because your parents were divorced.
Do not doubt God's love for you. Pastor Mandla Lupondwana, that is a perfect place to end this. Once again, thank you so much, Pastor, for joining us at this segment.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Viewers, I trust that you were challenged, inspired, and enjoyed that segment. But we are not yet done. Please stay where you are. We will be back after the break.
A blessed family life is not a given. Happy and strong families are built through guidance and help. The Cape Conference Virtual Pastor is here. Chat with a pastor that has experience in lifestyle, relationships, trauma, and loss counseling. Chat with the Cape Conference Virtual Pastor on weekdays 3 to 8 p.m.
Putting God first can be difficult. What can we learn from David that will help us put God first in our lives today? King David is remembered as a hero in the history of the Israelites. And, without a doubt, his most significant moments were those when he accepted the call to put God first. When his fellow Israelites were shaking in fear from the giant and his insults, David put God before his protection. Picking up a few stones and facing Goliath in the name of Jehovah seemed foolish to others. But David put God first, and God delivered him in that battle. Then, David was secretly anointed king, started working in King Saul's palace, and married the king's daughter. You would think that his life went from glory to glory after all this, right? Well, it did not. King Saul and his soldiers persecuted David as the greatest terrorist in the kingdom. Nevertheless, even during these frustrating and confusing circumstances, David put God first. When he entered the camp where King Saul was sleeping, he could have killed the tyrant and become king. After all, wasn't he already anointed? But David knew that by using his own hands to take over the kingdom, he would become king by his own works and not by faith, trusting in God's supernatural action. So, he decided to put God first, waiting for God's appointed time for him to become the leader. David didn't always put God first. His adultery with Bathsheba and her husband's killing were clear examples of sins David committed when he put himself first. But eventually, David took responsibility for his sins and repented. By the end of his life, he could not accept that his house looked better than the house of God. He vowed to do everything he could so God's house would be better than his palace. David put God first. His example compels us to do the same. As the deacons collect our tithe and promise, we are challenged to put God first.
Welcome back to Rays of Hope, Masikhanye. My name is Sivu. I am still your host. And right now, I am happy to be joined by Mrs. Sihle Msengana, a trained clinical psychologist, and she's going to help me look into the very important topic of how to share the parenting responsibilities with your ex-spouse. Mama, welcome to Rays of Hope.
Thank you.
Ninjani namhlanje?
Siphilile Nkosi, njani na?
Phila khona Mama Nkosi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is a very important topic that sadly we don't always talk about it, and we don't prepare for it until it has to happen. But maybe before we start, let's first define it. What is co-parenting, and what does it mean, and what does it not mean?
Co-parenting is a concerted effort by both parents, mother and father, on their children to make them better citizens of this world. And what it is not is when the one parent, especially the father, who thinks by giving money, that's co-parenting. Like there's a psychologist who's called Margaret Mead, who was talking about the absence of fathers, physical absence, or being there physically, but emotionally not being there. And they think, according to her, putting, I'm going to use her words, just putting a bacon on the table, that's it. And yet it's not. What is needed, a bacon, I know we don't eat it,
sure.
but that's that's her language. But what she is saying is that we need, as parents, to be emotionally involved with our children. That's what parenting is all about.
So to be involved, even though you don't live constantly with the child.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the beauty of it is that co-parenting, it does not necessarily has to happen when the parents are divorced. Even when they are together, there must be co-parenting. Like when a child is born, the father has to be active in the upbringing of that child when the child is born, to the extent that now we find that companies, they recognize the role of the father. They're now given leave to go, and when the child is born, they go there to go and look after the child as well. So there's a recognition.
Sure.
Because co-parenting is quite a new phenomenon that has been researched.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. Mama, you're saying something very, very important. I haven't thought about it. That sometimes the success, because we normally talk about co-parenting and we start to talk about it after, certainly, when there's been divorce. But what you're actually saying is that the ability to continue co-parenting even after divorce, many times it is shaped by the kind of parenting that was happening even while you were married.
Right, so.
Yes. I love that.
Right,
I love that. Okay, Mama, now let's come back to what are some of the things that make co-parenting not work in a divorce setup?
In a divorce setup?
Yeah.
In a divorce setup, there's, the sad thing that really it bothers me is that the couple, they would be dating, they have agreed, and they love each other, or maybe, I don't know, for whatever reasons, but they have agreed to date, and they agree to get married, and they get married. The child who is born out of that relationship was not asked. The child was born. And when these people part ways, they forget about their children. That they themselves decided to come together. Now they've decided to part ways, but the children are forgotten. And for me, that's a problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And how do you think, what are some of the steps that need to be involved as people? Sadly, of course, we are not necessarily condoning, but it is something that is happening. Divorce does happen. Yes. It is part of our existence. It has been for time immemorial. But what has not been there are aids and help that empowers couples to undergo this process, this painful process of divorce. What are some of the things that you think people that are undergoing divorce should be thinking about when it comes to their children in particular?
I think even before they get divorced, they must think about their children and talk about it. How are our children going to cope? Because, we've got researchers in psychology. There's one particular stage, psychosocial development of children, which is the youngsters, from 12 to 18. That stage, according to Erickson, is the stage when there's a child is identifying himself.
Sure.
It's identity versus confusion.
Sure.
For me, that's a critical stage when children they don't know who they are, number one. And then there's this divorce that comes.
Sure.
And divorce, it affects children. It doesn't matter what age, from young to even older than 18.
Sure.
The difference between the two, when they are young, they are more vulnerable. When they are older, it's not that they are not feeling the pinch. It's only that they have coping mechanisms.
Sure.
They can cope with the
Yeah,
situation.
they work, they've got
and they
financial
find
means,
ways
yeah.
to cope with it.
Yeah.
But the little ones, it's difficult for them. They blame themselves.
Sure.
Maybe it's me who has made my parents to part ways. And parents don't think about such things, that the children need to be, when you're deciding to part ways, you need to sit them down
sure.
and talk to them that we are thinking of going apart because of A, B, and C. And another thing that parents forget, children are like sponges. When there's the air, atmosphere in the house, in the home, is not loving, is not warm, they pick it up. They pick it up, and their hope is that let there be no separation. I love my parents, both of them. And they keep on hoping that there would be no parting of ways. By the time it happens, they already sensed, but they were telling themselves it will never happen.
Sure.
So this is important for parents. When they're thinking of doing such thing, they need to sit down together. That's co-parenting again. That's where it comes in. Sit down with their kids and say, we are thinking of parting ways because of A, B, and C, not just part ways. It's very selfish.
And of course, one of the then said things is that when people divorce, we get to a point where one of the parents has to even be dragged to court so that they can support the children financially. And of course, in what you are saying, you say, those are some of the conversations that people should be having. That, okay, these are the responsibilities that we have. Just because we are divorced, it doesn't mean that the children stop going to school. Just because we are divorced, it doesn't mean that they stop eating.
Yes.
Just because we are divorced doesn't mean they don't need clothes anymore. How do we make sure that, those responsibilities are still met towards the children? But thank you, Mama, for that. But now let's go into then, how can we make co-parenting work? Because it is part of who we are. It is part of the family fabric of our society. How can we make it work?
As you said, that's inevitable. People divorce.
Sure.
Something happens, and then they decide to part ways. And they say, research says, in South Africa, there's over 700,000 of divorce cases. 2020 statistics. So that's sad. And I do have a statistic for Seventh-day Adventists, but I won't go there.
Yeah.
There is what is called co-parenting therapy.
Okay.
That would should
didn't know
help parents when they're already in this situation.
Sure.
Because children, as I said, children blame themselves, and children exhibit a behavioral, dysfunctional ways of dealing with issues.
Sure.
At school, the performance drops. They become aggressive, and because they're angry.
Sure.
So we need to have these therapy sessions with the parents.
Sure.
How do we make it work? They need to come together.
Okay.
And for it to be successful, therapy is for parents to move away from anger. The therapist must help them to not to be stuck in that conflict.
They're blaming each other.
Not to be stuck in that conflict. They must move on. They must regard this relationship. I'm talking about now after divorce.
Sure.
They must regard this relationship as if it's a new relationship. Because they want them to move away from anger, move away from conflict, so that they are working on parenting these kids again. And the ways that needs to be, what can be done is for the parents to be taught on how to communicate. Because communication is very, very important. Because when they were communicating in the past, remember these partners who are angry with each other, who are fighting, even whatever, anything, sparks off anything, something that is not right for the kids.
Sure.
Now they need to be retaught how to communicate.
Sure.
So communication skills are very good. They are taught that. And they are also, the third point, helped to come up with parenting strategies.
Let's touch on those.
Parenting strategies. They must remember that their children come first
Okay.
in whatever. Number two, they must not use the children as pawns. Because what you find in family, in couples, is that they would embrace a child in order to get at the other partner. And children, as I say, they're like sponges. They can read the situation and know that if I want something, I know I'm going to get it from my father, even if my mother does not give it to me. So what they need to do now, the parents, they must speak to each other to say, listen, so-and-so wants this. What do you think? It's not going to be easy. Because you must remember, these people have parted ways and they have been very angry with each other. This is why the therapist must help them to evolve, to move away from for the sake of their children. That's very, very important.
Thank you, Mama Msengana. Of course, there's another dynamic that we don't normally talk about, is the two partners, they don't stay separated, they continue, start new relationships, the other one even gets married. Now my question is, what is the role of the new partner in assisting their partner who has a child elsewhere to continue being a good parent to that child and not see that relationship as a threat to the relationship that they are starting now?
Thank you for asking that. Mother and father, they now have their partners. They've moved on.
Sure.
Part of therapy that happens for co-parenting is to involve them. The partners, if they both are married, the foursome will have to come to the session, so that whatever is being said to the partner, to the father, the partner must hear and be able to be comfortable with being the stepmother or the stepfather. And that, so that the child also knows that I've got another mother, I've got a second daddy, and it becomes fun. And sometimes even the other partner can go and fetch the child from school, so that there is, what is important is this child who has brought to this world, the upbringing. We want to make better citizens of these kids.
Making better citizens of our children. That's a beautiful thought there. Mama Msengana, you've got a minute to speak to parents who have children still with their ex-spouses, and there is still the need and the responsibility of co-parenting and raising those children. What do you have to say to them as a closing shot?
You know, God says, I hate divorce. And that is for a reason. Not only the children, but the families, they get disrupted. When a child experiences this, her world is shattered. It's no longer stable. I just want to tell you something before we finish, which people don't realize. When a child, a small child, I'm talking about when children yearn for both parents to be there in their lives. When the child is small, find them at creche or lower schools. They will mimic other children who have fathers, because they come and boast, this weekend I went with my father fishing, and they will also make up a father. I also did with my dad. They don't have a father. They yearn for both parents. So please, parents, when you think about divorcing, think twice. Yes, you made it, because we can't help these things, but sit your children down and tell them the reasons. They will accept them, and be there for them even after divorce. Please be there for them. Do what you did. It may not be the same, but be there for them in every respect, so that children have both parents.
Thank you, Mama Msengana. That is a perfect place to end it, that children still need their both parents. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate having you here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Our viewers at home, And wherever you are watching us, we trust that you enjoyed that segment with this Mrs. Msengana. And we are not yet done. Please stay where you are. We'll be back soon.
Putting God first can be difficult. What can we learn from Hannah that will help us put God first in our lives today? Hannah experienced an incredible miracle in her life. God answered her prayer and gave her a son. A few months earlier, she had entered the temple in Jerusalem and opened her heart to God, promising that if God gave her a son, she would dedicate him to his service. And so she did. She named her son Samuel, which means heard by God. We can imagine Hannah sitting with little Samuel and teaching him about God by telling and retelling him the old stories. Samuel was a miracle, and she loved him with all her heart. But the time soon came when she had to take Samuel to the temple to serve the Lord, as she had promised. It must have been difficult, even though God had given her many other children. Putting God first is often difficult, but here are Hannah's own words. My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Hannah was not aware that Samuel would become one of the greatest prophets in the history of Israel. He was a man of God who anointed King Saul and even King David himself. None of this would have happened if his mother had refused to put God first. Parents, have you ever wondered what impact putting God first will have on your children? It is impossible to predict the kind of impact children will have on the world when they grow up witnessing their parents putting God first. Hannah put God first. Her example compels us to do the same. As the deacons collect the tithe and promise, we are challenged to put God first.
Welcome back to Rays of Hope Masikhanye. I am Sihle Kotela, still your host. And as we are concluding this episode, I am now joined by Ndumie Myata, author of the book, Oh, But Divorce. And she's going to be helping me to look into the theme of today, divorce, but from a child's perspective. Ndumie, welcome to Rays of Hope.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
We're very happy to be having you here. This is a very important topic, and it is not normal that we look at it from the child's perspective. And I think that's very important. But tell me, as somebody who also has gone through having your parents divorce, talk to me about the first time you heard about it. How old were you? Where were you? What emotions and feelings you went through?
Thank you so much for that question. When I first heard about my parents' divorce, it was an unexpected thing. Yes, I have seen and sensed the tension, but I did not necessarily think they would go that far with the decision. So I think when I received it, I was a bit shocked, so much that I don't think my emotion was an emotional reaction, or my reaction was emotional. It was just very unreal. It was very uninformed. And at that time, I had thought that it would be something that they would perhaps, reconsider their decision and inform us of something else.
Sure.
And I do not think it would be as permanent as it has been.
Sure. And you said you were how old?
I was 13 when I first knew about them.
Sure.
And then it only was finalized when I was 15 years old.
Sure. Now, a child is obviously an important stakeholder of every family and gets affected by the decisions that are made by the family. By that, I mean the parents in particular, especially a decision as big as this one of parents deciding to divorce. Now, from your experience, and perhaps speaking for every other child, as a child, how, when, and where do you think or do you wish you should have featured in the decision to get divorced?
now looking at, so many years after, I don't think they would have done it any other way in terms of informing me at that stage.
Okay.
However, I do wish I would have featured in the thought process them as a couple coming to that decision. So I don't think any time before or after would have had an effect. It still would have been a hard pill to swallow either way.
Sure.
But the thought process when they were as individuals making that decision,
Sure.
I wish I featured more there.
Sure. So basically, this is very interesting. That as you are making the decision, for the parents to be actively thinking about how is this going to affect Ndumie and her siblings and the other children as well.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yes.
All right, Ndumie. Obviously, there's no way that you can, as a child, go through something this big without it affecting you.
Yes.
Now, we could look at this question from different angles. I'm going to be asking you, how has this affected you looking into your life? I mean, we could look at it from your views on God, your well-being psychologically, and your views on the relationships, and your views on family. And I'm not going to prescribe for you how you want to concentrate on that, but talk to me about how has the divorce of your parents affected you as their child?
In so many different ways.
Sure.
As you said, as an individual, you've got so many aspects in you.
Sure.
And unfortunately, the divorce of your parent penetrates in all of those aspects. So exactly from how you view God, from how you relate to other people. But I think the main source where everything for me stemmed from was the lifestyle change. I think that was a big one.
Sure.
That affected my self-esteem, that later affected my relationships, that, because it all boils down to self-worth. So because of that change, because of that downgrade that we had experienced, then my everything just collapsed.
Sure.
So I really think that had the lifestyle been maintained or even improved, then I would have been as affected.
Sure.
So that's where everything else was. But it does challenge one's worldview, also on families, because now are you going to have children or not? Are you going to get married?
Sure.
Even do you even trust? Do you even consider marriage as a worthwhile thing to commit yourself into? So a lot gets to be changed, and you get to think about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's where then God features, because if you go through that phase alone, then you can be destroyed, utterly destroyed,
Yeah.
and it can really mess you up emotionally and psychologically. So it's very multidimensional.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned something that is very important. Look, divorce, as you are saying, is difficult and painful as it is on your own. But what you are saying is that to also then have your lifestyle change. For example, you used to go to this particular school, and because the parents were together, and maybe one parent was the one that is working, which was the case in your own experience as shared in the book. And then because they are no longer together now, you can't go to those schools, or you can't stay in this environment that you're used to staying. That must really add a lot of confusion and pain, even more so, even though divorce on its own is painful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think for us, we thankfully we remained at the same schools.
Sure.
But the suburb, or rather the neighborhood in which we're in, that changed. And you used to live this lifestyle with these friends at this level. Now imagine if now you can't no longer afford the things that you used to. Exactly. Then your self-esteem gets shattered. You think yourself less now because your friends have got a certain hairstyle that you can't afford, or go to certain places. So I think for me, and yes, the emotional turmoil, that's something else, because as a child of divorce, you somehow feel rejected. And you feel that the attention has been drawn away from you. I'm a firstborn. I was the only child for 7 years. So I was so used to, attention, to be that center of love. And when my two biggest fans were at war, that, that shattered me, because I no longer got what I was used to, what I've always known.
I think amaXhosa adla ngokuthi xa inkunzi ezimbini zisilwa ingca that suffers.
Exactly.
And I think it's something that you are also referring to. But now talk to me, Ndumie, about I normally say this to spouses, that your your former spouse could be your ex-husband or your ex-boyfriend, your ex-husband, but their child is never their ex-child, and your parent is never their your father is never your ex-father.
Yes.
Or your ex-mother. Now, how, as a child, how do you think the parents who are deciding to get a divorce can help you to maintain your relationship with both of them? Because I can imagine it must be difficult to have to choose between the people that you love the most.
Yes.
And also to I don't know, to also remember that just because somebody is a bad spouse, it does not always mean that they are a bad parent.
Yes.
And how do you as a child wish parents could help the child to maintain their relationships with the other parent, or both of them, in fact?
Thank you so much for that question, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that children of divorce face on a daily. And I even say in my book that, we always hear about a parent's love for a child, but we underestimate the child's love for their parent. Your parent could be on drugs, your parent could be the worst human being ever, but that parent will mean the world to you. You might be disappointed on their actions. Yes, you might be disappointed on how they conduct themselves, but you will never stop loving them. And it's something that the other spouse often misinterprets by you loving, which is a very natural child thing to do. Then they feel that you are rejecting them. So it gets very challenging, because for even a simple thing as a visit, that could be a challenge on its own. You want to go, you want to visit, but there's this also, you want them and not me. So it's such a big thing that I wish parents could help. Well, if going back to your question, how they could then, it's a very personal thing. I think introspection is big when it comes to divorce from both parties. And inner peace, I think, as difficult as it gets, but it's absolutely necessary for parents to look and, see what their role was. If they feel like they are innocent, to the core, then accept. Acceptance is a big thing. And just, and in as much as you feel that you've been wronged, but just understand that your child, they don't have to have that burden on them. Even if you feel like you are right, you are justified, but just have your child at the center of everything.
Yeah. Thanks. Do you think that things like this would go a long way in helping the child as a parent, maybe especially the one who gets to stay, and normally the ones that get to stay with it. Maybe let me not say that. I was okay. If you get to stay with your child and the other one parent does not stay, do you think it would help if I, as this parent who stays with you, decide that I will never speak ill of your father or of your mother if they are the one that is not that is staying with you? How do you as a child, even in his absence, feel when I, as the present parent, speak out of anger or ill about the absent father? What goes through the child's mind when that happens?
It somehow reflects on you as a child. Not so. Yes, they are speaking about the other parent, but for you as a child, you're saying that's my parent. Therefore, I'm somehow like that. Yes, that that I'm 50% that person. So 50% of me is what they are saying. So it goes deeper than just one parent venting out. For you, especially when children are younger, then they take all of that. So if you say, your father or your mother is a this and that, to you it says you are that. So it gets deep, and that's something that I wish parents could understand and therefore mind what they are saying. And then it goes back to that inner peace. It goes back to that acceptance that this is the situation. I unfortunately had a child with this particular person, but it is what it is. And find healthy, constructive ways to move forward.
Sure. Now, is there obviously, as a child, you look at these people and you also get angry. And are there ways that maybe the child can also do, though I don't think it's the child's responsibility to do that, but are there things that a child can do to better their own relationship with both their parents?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because at the end of the day, you as a child get to react. And I think that's where you've got control on how you react. And it takes a lot of work, yes, but it's doable. It's absolutely doable that you want to maintain this relationship. What are you going to do? If they reject that, how are you going to react? And then, you know, and you change it as you go along. You adapt it as you go along until it will become better. Because your parent is your parent at the end of the day. You know, regardless of time, but they will get to that point of wanting to make things right with you.
Speaking of time, we are nearing the end of this conversation, but I've got to ask you this question. There is a child who has also had the painful experience of, that is watching us right now, who has also had a painful experience of their parents going through divorce. What do you want that child to know?
They must always remember that because their parents' marriage did not work, that does not reflect on them and their life. So their life does not have to end with their parents' marriage, and that it is not their fault. Especially little ones, for some reason they think it's them, it's not you. You might feel rejected, but it's not because you are this or that. It's just the way things happen. Your role, it is to turn whatever that's happening into your life, and you can. You know, good things do come out of bad situations, and you can be that good thing.
Sure. And speaking about good things, looking at the book, your relationship with both your parents has since improved.
It has, and I'm very grateful for that. And I think they now understand, finally. They now understand, and we are now starting to work and walk together.
Walking together, that is a positive place to end it, Ndumie. Once again, thank you so much for this inspiring and informative session.
Thank you so much for having me.
Viewers at home, I trust that you enjoyed that section with Ndumie Myata, and that you were inspired also by the entire episode. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, send them on the email that is appearing on the screen, masikhanye@cc.adventist.org. And if there are any questions, you may also send the text to the number that is appearing on the screen. And as we end, let's remember, you are the light of the world. And the Bible says that as you receive that light, don't keep it, don't hide it, take it, go to the world and share it, and make this world a better place. Until next time, Masikhanye.